Right, so here we are today welcoming our famous son from South Australia, Jason Gillespie. Great to have you on board, Des, for today's review of the game last night.
Fantastic to see you, Buck, and yeah, really looking forward to it. It was a great game for Australia, no doubt.
It was, wasn't it? I mean, they were out there looking for a very, very emphatic win, a comprehensive win, because they need to get their net run rate up, and they certainly achieved that. And one of the key players that helped them through that was a spinner that was at the Adelaide Strikers. He mightn't have been coach at the time, but he was certainly part of the fold down there, Adam Zampa, who picked up his 5 wickets. So probably a bit of an insight into, because you spend a lot of time around T20 these days, all around the world, bit of an insight into spinners and maybe particularly Zampa, how the Australians are using him and other spinners in other teams really making an impact on the game these days.
Yeah, they most certainly are, and I suppose particularly wrist spinners, Buck. Wrist spinners around the world seem to have a real impact. Looking at Zampa bowling last night against Bangladesh, one thing that really stands out for me watching Adam Zampa play around the world is his ownership of his length. So the length he bowls, he keeps the stumps in play a lot. The bowl's very straight, but it's the length he bowls. He very rarely bowls too short or over pitches. Now, I know last night his last 2 wickets he got were to the tail enders, and they were a lot fuller deliveries. He got one caught on the edge and caught it slip. But normally it's that sort of top of the pad, the top of the knee roll length he bowls, which is not full enough for a batsman to have a step hit, and it's not short enough for them to cut or pull. And I think that's his real strength. He's not a big turner of the ball, but he's got subtle changes of pace. But I think the way he can just own that spot on the pitch, that length, is absolute key to his bowling.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with you about wrist spin. I think it's almost a vital ingredient into your side, into the makeup of your side, into the balance of your side, if you can find one good enough to do that. And obviously, Afghanistan had a bit of a mystery guy, Mujib, but injured, but a very key player, and then Rashid, who plays with you at the Strikers. Again, a real exponent of that leg spin in the T20 format.
Yeah, most certainly. And it's really, we talked about how Adam Zampa's used for Australia. It's basically as soon as the power play's done, they use their quicks, and they've been using Glenn Maxwell a little bit in the power play to pinch an over here and there. But they use Zampa outside of the power play and before the 15th over. So they just get him through. He's a wicket-taking option, and he doesn't go for a lot of runs. It's interesting how Afghanistan use both their mystery spinners in Mujib and Rashid. Mujib tends to bowl within the first 10. He's normally bowled out by the 10th over. And although Rashid Khan, around the world in all the different T20 tournaments, he tends to be used throughout the 20 overs. Afghanistan use him quite differently, and that's probably because they've got Mujib, who can bowl predominantly in the first 10 overs, including the power play. They hold him back, and a lot of the time he'll bowl his 4 overs from the 10th over onwards. So just an interesting tactics there by Afghanistan, but certainly with Sunrisers Hyderabad, where Rashid Khan plays in IPL, the Adelaide Strikers in the Big Bash, we certainly like to use him at least a couple of overs in the first 10, and then we like to hold it a couple of overs back in the second 10. Sometimes we'll employ him in the first 6, and that just comes down to captain's call based on whatever matchup he feels is appropriate.
Mate, it's wonderful to hear you talking about the art of spin bowling, but you have the art of pace bowling. And I think in T20 cricket, what's really important, again, is that power play where you can take wickets. And we use generally the quicks. And Australia has a fantastic lineup with Stark, Hazlewood and Cummins. The other night against England, they weren't able to make that impact in the power play. And therefore, again, someone like Zampa probably suffered because he was on the back foot trying to pull the game back and restrict runs, whereas generally we've got wickets in the bank and then Zampa can continue to attack. But I'm interested in your view on the Australian quicks. They're a reasonably potent group. It does seem like they're really building into the tournament. Stark talked about that last night. Hazlewood definitely, I think, has got his lengths and lines and paces right. Cummins is the one to me that's probably more inconsistent at the moment, but we know he's a quality player. But of course, we've got one of your boys, Kane Richardson, who's their shadow, sitting off the field and not really getting any game time, which is okay, provided the 3 quicks can last through the tournament.
Yeah, most certainly. And it's interesting you mentioned Pat Cummins there, because I think that if Kane Richardson was to play, I think that's the role. Coming in, doing the Pat Cummins role. Pat Cummins runs in, hits the pitch, uses his Yorker, but probably it's not his go-to. He likes to bowl into the pitch, changes of pace, and which is very similar to Kane Richardson. Where Kane has an advantage there, I think he can get his Yorker in, and Kane can bowl in every phase. I think Pat is used probably more up until about 15 overs. Doesn't bowl a lot in the last 5 overs. That's where Stark, I think, is outstanding. Stark kind of bookends the innings, doesn't he? I think get one up early. If the ball, particularly the ball's swinging, I like what Aaron Fit, how he uses Mitchell Stark. If the ball is swinging, he may give him a second over up front. If the ball's not swinging, he'll try something else, and that's fine. I think you've got someone who can bowl 145k an hour, and if he's swinging the ball, Mitchell's default is to go fuller rather than shorter, which is probably different to most seam bowlers. We see Josh Hazlewood, his default would be really hit that pitch hard, that almost just short of a test match length, and looked at the top of the stumps, the hip height and bowl through there. Whereas Mitchell Stark, his default will be to go really full, looking to maximise any swing that's on offer. So I think they complement each other very well. But certainly Pat Cummins, Kane Richardson, there must be temptation there, I think, with the selectors to possibly get Kane a game for the reasons you mentioned at the start. You want to keep your best team on the park and winning, but also you've got to be mindful that you want to get some game time into some of your reserves, in case they're required or conditions are different.
That's so right. I think one of the options for them is Stoinis and Marsh both do a similar sort of role. I think Marsh again shows at number 3. That's where he should play this game for the rest of the tournament. Therefore, Stoinis to me is one of those players that, yes, you're there to finish off a game, but hopefully your top order has done a really good job for you and possibly not required. Maybe he's the swinging sort of player. But you mentioned then, as we move towards the end of the tournament, it really is reaching an interesting stage in both pools. If we stayed in the pool with Australia at the moment, obviously the key games coming up, Australia, the West Indies. West Indies got beaten again last night by Sri Lanka. So I don't see them presenting too much of an issue for Australia. It's just whether or not Australia can continue to increase its run rate with them. But the key game is obviously South Africa versus England. And again, I don't see South Africa getting past England. So I'm seeing Australia moving into the semi-finals. What about yourself?
Yeah, I've got a similar view. I just think England are a very well-oiled machine, aren't they? I think that the bases are covered, seam, spin. Their batting is so dynamic. They're very well led by Owen Morgan. They're building nicely, England. South Africa, I tend to agree. I just don't think they've got the quality to match England at this time. And then I think from Australia's perspective, I think what the Australians will be hoping and Australian fans will be hoping is that the West Indies players, their minds are already elsewhere and they're focused on getting on that plane. But that could be dangerous as well because, their mindset could be, well, we've got nothing to lose. Let's just go out and play and have a little bit of fun. And that's probably where the West Indies could be a bit of a banana skin. But I fully expect Australia to win. I fully expect England to win, which will allow Australia to go through.
So in the other pool, we've got New Zealand still playing Namibia and Afghanistan, and India have got Scotland and Namibia. So again, one would think on the strength of how India played the other night, which is where we expected them to be from the first game, but they weren't. They should be able to get past those two teams, but I don't see New Zealand falling to either Namibia. And we just talked about Afghanistan. I don't think Afghanistan are good enough for them. So see New Zealand going through, which means India miss out.
Yeah, that's probably the most likely scenario. I would agree with that. However, just those two games that New Zealand have, Namibia have surprised a few people this tournament, no doubt about that. Afghanistan, it depends which Afghanistan turn up. They are relatively new to international cricket. They're going to be inconsistent, but they do have some real match winners. You know, the guys we've spoken about, you know, well led by Mohammad Nabi. Look, that they could be a bit of a banana skin for New Zealand. But look, I fully expect New Zealand to beat both Namibia and Afghanistan. But, you know, they shouldn't take them lightly because you never know what happens in tournament play.
Well, tournament play and also T20 cricket, again, as you've experienced as a coach now so many times around the world, you know, there's almost one ball that can turn a game in T20 cricket, but 6 balls, you know, whether they're dot balls, whether they're wickets, whether they're wides, whether they're no balls, they all make a significant difference to the end. So, yes, while we can sort of sit here and pontificate a little bit about who might win, it's still going to be on the day. So listen, Jace and Des, look, great pleasure to have you on and great pleasure to see you, and be fantastic to watch the progress of the Redbacks and the Strikers and every other team that you might be coaching in the future, because, again, very solid citizen, an outstanding bowler, but a wonderful coach, which obviously all the teams are really beginning to find out as your coaching career really develops. So great pleasure to have you on board, mate.
Oh, thanks, Buck. Well, I learned from the best, mate. So, look, it's been great. You know, obviously, new role here with South Australia with the Redbacks. It's exciting times for us. We've got some progress to be made, but I think we are making some progress. And obviously, I've been with the Adelaide Strikers for a while now, coming up with the 7th BBL with the franchise. So, you know, excited there. We've got a couple of new faces. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Right, mate. Thanks once again. Talk soon.
No worries. See you, Buck.
And so that was some interesting insights from Jason Dizzy Gillespie. But now we move to a really fascinating area of sport and the analysis of sport. And we're moving from the quantitative data, the numbers game, if you like, and we now begin to look at what can complement quantitative data, and that is qualitative analysis. And here with me is Tony Charge, who's the CEO of GameChanger. And Tony, for